Millions of black people have normalized the prison that white oppressive forces have created for our minds through the monopoly over information that we receive, which allows them to control what we believe and what we think. Critically think and look at the facts. A Jewish person would never trust a person that is known to be a Nazi. This is because people references their underlying relationship with other groups of people based upon the historical relationship shared between themselves and other groups. Therefore, the fact that many black people now perceive ourselves as being our worst enemies and reveres Caucasians in spite of such a brutally horrific history of oppression is proof that many black people are not actually functioning based upon an accurate interpretation of the history shared between our racial group and Caucasians. Moreover, during the 1960s, black liberation was at the forefront of the collective minds of millions of black people. Today, if you mention black liberation in a room filled with black people, many will immediately say that they don't want to hear that black shit. Millions of black people no longer seek black liberation. Most instead merely seeks a comfortable footing within the system of white supremacy. This is a hidden reality. Also, during the 1960s, we called ourselves brothers and sisters, and we called our oppressors crackers. Today, we're calling ourselves niggers and bitches, and we're calling the oppressors white people. Clearly, in doing so, we're respecting ourselves less and we're respecting them more. Clearly, black people's collective mindset has changed in ways that totally benefits the white society. It's always by deliberate design whenever the oppressed starts thinking exactly as the oppressors wants them to think. Regardless of how intelligent people are, if it's possible to control the information that they receive, it's entirely possible to control what they'll believe. The human mind is like a computer. No matter how efficient it may be, its reliability is only as great as the information that's fed into it. If it's possible to control the input into the human mind, it's entirely possible to control what a person will think. Because white oppressive forces controls most of the information that we receive, this allows them to control what we believe and how we think. They've exploited this immense position of power over us by systematically feeding mental enslaving disinformation into our collective minds. And in doing so, they've literally created a psychological prison for the minds of black people. Black people have been socialized to think and behave in ways benefiting the white society. Socialized is when the oppressed and or subordinate population has been conditioned to think and behave in ways that are beneficial to the dominant culture. White social scientists describe this hidden nefarious practice as merely instilling a value system into the collective minds of the subordinate population that makes them adhere to the authority and existing infrastructure of the dominant culture. This is what's been done to black people. Unlike at the conclusion of World War II, when the less than 12-year Jewish Holocaust came to an end, when the U.S. government and the United Nations contributed massive financial support to rebuild their lives, there was no moral obligation to do the same for we Africans. Although the African Holocaust lasted hundreds of years longer and resulted in millions of more death and more greatly decimated the African culture, when slavery was abolished, America, Great Britain, and many other white nations that benefited from the exploitation of Africa felt no moral obligation to restore the culture and our lives of African people. Those Western nations that benefited themselves greatly through the exploitation of Africa and Africa's natural resources and African people, instead focused on their own self-interest to protect themselves from unified massive black retribution, especially given that the fact that their mistreatment of African people and exploitation of Africa's natural resources continues indefinitely. Those white nations instead socialize Africans. There are 4 ways to effectively socialize the collective minds of generations of people: by what we're taught, by what we see, by what we hear, and through repetition. Because the white society controls the education we're taught, the media images we see, the societal narratives that we hear, and through repetition of these combined things, have allowed them to socialize the minds of millions of black people without most of us even realizing it. Black people have been stripped of our true identity, culture, history, true spiritual system, have instead been indoctrinated to think and behave in ways that benefits the white society. And far too many of us have normalized our mental change. The reason why most black people are unaware of the fact that they've been socialized is because people that have been socialized rarely ever learned of this fact. But unfortunately, this is the hidden reality faced by we Africans. The African slave of the 21st century are those who cannot free their minds from the white society's socialization process. If you think that this is merely a silly conspiracy theory, it's because you've been brainwashed to think that. The socializing of the oppressed is a commonly used hidden practice. Throughout Western history, those empires that were brutally oppressive, fearing an eventual retribution from the oppressed, have often prevented it by socializing the collective minds of those they brutally oppressed. Because whenever people are oppressed for long duration, their collective aggressions toward their oppressors' dominance will continue to grow until acts of massive rebellion becomes inevitable. This is an inherent response within the collective human psyche whenever people are held under long-term oppression. The only way to prevent these pending acts of rebellion and retribution is by socializing the minds of the oppressed. More specifically, by socializing the oppressed to think in ways that makes them revere their oppressors and that misleads them to perceive themselves as being their worst enemies. Doing so shifts the collective aggression of the oppressed away from their oppressors and redirect it towards their own people, thus preventing the oppressed from engaging in massive acts of rebellion against the oppressors. This is the hidden true reason why the white societies always propagate and overemphasize the issue of black on black crime. It's not because they care. It's propaganda designed to instill the belief that it's we black people that are our worst enemies into our subconscious minds. This shifts our collective aggressions away from the white society and redirects them towards our own people. It also makes us afraid of each other and distrust each other. This socializing of the oppressed is also necessary because people are inherently tribal and therefore do not naturally conform to the long-term dominance of other racial groups over their lives. People must be manipulated to do so. This is also easily achieved by bombarding the oppressed with fraudulent, negative propaganda about themselves. The oppressor manipulates the oppressed to believe that their racial group is always within a state of crisis and therefore needs their oppressors to govern over their lives. This not only makes the oppressed more compliant with their oppressor's dominance over their lives, it in many cases makes the oppressed even prefer the oppressor's dominance over their lives. To the detriment of we black people, this is our hidden reality. Many black people insist that our collective minds have been shaped by silly slave syndrome myth. But that's absolutely untrue. Usually people have the right to believe whatever they choose to believe. However, there's a profound exception to this rule when it comes to the oppressed. The oppressed must gain a clear, concise, and accurate understanding of our plighted condition. Because if our understandings are flawed, then all liberating remedies and strategies that stem from those misunderstandings will also be flawed. This is why those of us who know the truth must teach. We are not being controlled by silly slave syndrome myth. The truth is that our mindsets are shaped by the books we read, the education we taught, the movies and TV shows that we watch. Because white people controls these things, this has allowed them to indoctrinate thoughts into our minds, thoughts and ideologies into our minds that protects the system of white supremacy. It's being done to us while we don't even realize it. Generations after generations of black people, from the womb to the tomb, have been socialized to think in ways that protects and serve the interests of the white society. It is the most unknown aspect of the entire African Holocaust, and it's the white society's best kept secret. The Bible was actually the first propaganda literature used to socialize black people to think and behave in ways that benefits the white society. The early white Christians' conversions of Africans into their religion had absolutely nothing to do whatsoever with saving the souls of Africans so that Africans may join them in heaven during the afterlife. This is an irrefutable fact because the early white Christians literally believed that Africans had no souls and that heaven was for whites only. In fact, the early white Christians believed that the thought of an African entering the kingdom of heaven was as ridiculously as blasphemous as a dog doing so. This is an absolute fact. When we largely look at facts as they were, we can say with great certainty that the white enslavers' conversion of Africans into Christians had absolutely nothing to do with saving the souls of Africans. There was another self-serving reason why they put their time and energy into teaching Christianity to a people they otherwise treated so brutally. The self-serving reason was to indoctrinate the belief of a white God into their subconscious minds. When the Africans were taught to believe that God is white, this produced a profound adoration towards whiteness within their minds. This profound adoration of whiteness is then transferred and transposed upon the white race. This subconsciously happens within the minds of the Africans, but I'm realizing it. But this made the Africans more subservient towards the white colonizers and enslavers. This aided in facilitating the colonization of Africa, and it made Africans into more loyal slaves. The effects of that brainwashing scheme implemented hundreds of years ago has been left uncorrected and unremoved for generations. It's why you can still now visit many black churches and find its walls stubbornly adorned with pictures of Caucasian deities. They fooled us, now we fool ourselves. Furthermore, through Christianity, millions of black people have been brainwashed to believe that all the wrongs that the white society have done to us throughout history have been washed clean by the blood of a fictional Jesus. Black people were also originally forced to become Christians. And then his doctrine was used to compel black people to forgive the white society for their brutality inflicted upon us. As the Bible dictated, we must forgive them. Although the white society has never actually repented for the evil deeds against black people, they merely insist that black people, as good Christians, forgive them as their Bible teaches. Furthermore, by teaching Africans that a white God sent down his white son to earth to die for us, this literally makes millions of black people feel indebted to the white society. Millions feel indebted to the white society for bringing Christianity to us. Christianity has proven itself as being history's most successful propaganda tool used for controlling black people, for socializing the minds of black people. Many black Christians defend their religion by insisting that Christianity was originally taught in Ethiopia. Therefore, it's actually originally our true religion. Many black people believe that the discovery of old Ethiopian Bibles proves this to be true. However, in reality, the Roman Emperor Constantine created the false Christian religion in the year 325 AD. Christianity did not become the official religion of Ethiopia until the reign of King Ezana in the year 341 AD. That was 16 years after the white Romans created the false religion. So those old Bibles and old Christian paintings in Ethiopia proves nothing. The Romans created the false religion. Christianity is not the belief system practiced by we Africans before 325 AD. When the Romans created the Jesus Messiah myth, it was an ingenious scam. Its ideology that to enter the kingdom of heaven, you had to go through Jesus, literally meant that the church held the only key to heaven. That's ultimate power on earth. Moreover, the Romans that wrote the Bible in the year 325 AD were a sexually depraved society. They routinely engaged in massive orgies, pedophilia, incest, bestiality, and death sports. They continued these practices even after writing the Bible. Furthermore, the Roman Emperor Constantine, the person in charge of writing the Bible, he was the one who put Jesus in the Bible. He himself refused to convert into a Christian, even on his deathbed. He refused to do so. These noted facts, combined with the fact that the Bible strongly condones slavery, totally disqualifies it from containing the true words of God. Moreover, critically think, if the Bible truly contained the empowering words of God, it would have been kept as far away as possible from our enslaved ancestors and not brutally forced upon them as it in fact was. The reason why there's rarely any resolve whenever a black conscious person tries to teach these noted facts about Christianity to a black Christian is because the conscious person presents documented facts, critical thinking, reasoning, and common sense. But black Christians have been taught to stand by blind faith, even when the abundance of evidence is to the contrary. This sounds very admirable, but it's actually imprisons the mind. This abandonment of intelligent critical thinking skills in exchange for blind faith is why it can be very difficult to show the truth to Black Christians about the fallacies within their religion, even when presenting them with facts and historical evidence. This is also why most will argue vehemently defending their religion, but rarely, if ever, will they research any of the evidence that you present to them that is contrary of the belief. Some will even label those of us that try to show them evidence that's contrary of their belief as being agents of the devil. They will say the devil sent us to test them. They have been conditioned to abandon their critical thinking skills and to ignore all evidence to the contrary of their religion. Therefore, their intelligence level has literally been decreased by their religion. To try to teach the truth about Christianity to a Black Christian that have renounced the use of reason, facts, and common sense is literally like feeding medicine to the dead. The Bible was the first propaganda literature used to socialize Africans to think in ways that benefit the white society. Now, in 1968, white social scientists determined that the socializing of Africans needed to be reinforced unrelentingly to remain effective. The hidden reason? During the 1960s, African Americans' unified protest against the U.S. system of white supremacy was unprecedented. African Americans confronted on all fronts. It was confronted through civil disobedient tactics, militant means, nonviolent protests, and with Black lawyers pleading for equality within America's highest Supreme Court. African Americans' unified protest still remains unrivaled by any other minority group in U.S. history. African Americans had unknowingly proved themselves as being the greatest threat against the U.S. system of white supremacy. In the face of the unprecedented unified Black protest, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover said that the unification of the American Negro was the greatest threat against the nation. To remedy what was then called the Negro problem, in 1967, President Lyndon Johnson put together a committee called the Kerner Commission. Their assignment was to study the Negro problem, find the cause of the problem, and then develop solutions. In 1968, white social scientists hired by the Kerner Commission determined that an aggravating core factor for that decade's unprecedented unified Black protests was caused by an elevated and unifying Black collective self-esteem brought on by the emergence of that decade's Black Pride movement. They also learned, this is when they learned, that while oppressors through a weaponry advantage of guns and cannons can brutally invade and enslave a people, they, however, cannot win their loyalty or sustain peace with those people indefinitely unless those people's minds have been socialized to think in ways that prevent them from unifying against their oppressors. Because whenever people are oppressed for long durations, their collective aggressions toward their oppressors will continue to grow until it reaches a boiling point, resulting in massive acts of rebellion against their oppressors. The oppressed always eventually rebels against their oppressors. This is what was happening during the 1960s. It's an inherent response within the collective human psyche whenever people are oppressed for long duration. This is what was happening to us. So they determined that they had to continue to socialize our minds beyond the limitations by the Bible. White racism reached a boiling point among African Americans, which resulted in that decade's unprecedented unified Black protests. Those white social scientists largely determined that they could subdue unified Black protests by deploying an ideological subversion system that keeps our collective self-esteem low and that keeps our collective aggression shifted away from the white society and redirected towards ourselves. They achieved both of these objectives by deploying propaganda campaigns that keeps Black people believing the fraudulent worst narratives about ourselves. Presently, all narratives about Black people are written exclusively by white people. Whatever white sources says about Black people is automatically deemed as factual. This unfair scenario allows white oppressive forces to easily negatively shape how Black people perceive ourselves collectively. They use it to control us. People can be easily controlled by the societal narratives that they routinely receive about themselves. When people are constantly fed positive and affirming information about themselves, this raises their collective self-esteem and it unifies them. It doesn't matter if the information presented is untrue. Most people will act upon it because they've all been given the same information. On the other hand, however, when people are constantly fed negative, demoralizing disinformation about themselves, the exact opposite happens. When people constantly receive negative information about themselves, they become demoralized, divided, self-loathing, and they become more compliant with their oppressor's dominance over their lives. In fact, many will even prefer it. This also creates self-hatred, disunity, which attacks the core foundation of what bonds the people. They can then be ruled over indefinitely. And again, it doesn't matter that the information presented is untrue. Most people will act accordingly to the information because they've all been given the same disinformation about themselves. This second scenario of demoralization is precisely how the white society now controls us. It's how they now socialize us. Keeping us believing the fraudulent worst narratives about ourselves is how they now prevent us from unifying against them. This nefarious psychological warfare tactic works by tapping into the immense power that shame has upon the human mind to mentally enslave millions of Black people. This is our hidden reality. It's no strange occurrence that many Black people are now self-loathing, now perceive ourselves as being our own worst enemies, and reveres Caucasians in spite of such a brutal history to the contrary. These thoughts within the minds of Black people that clearly benefits the white society were deliberately indoctrinated into the collective minds of millions of Black people without most of us even realizing it. Presently, white government agents that specializes in psychiatry and propaganda analyze and studies everything about the Black population. Our beliefs, our likes, our dislikes, our strengths, our vulnerabilities. This surveillance information is gathered and decisions are then made on which fraudulent stories to produce to best create certain psychological feelings among the Black population that assist the white society in maintaining their control and dominance over us. The white media's unrelenting negative depiction of Black people that amplifies the negative to the point that it distorts our reality is much more than just biased media reporting. It is actually an insidious Black racially demoralizing divide and conquer psychological warfare campaign. This is the hidden reality. Demoralizing divide and conquer is a method of maintaining control over a targeted population through constant and unrelenting demoralization in order to create self-hate and division between them. It is a well-proven tactic that has been used for a very long time by oppressors to control their oppressed population. Because when the oppressed are kept demoralized, divided, and self-loathing, this condition makes them much more easier to control. It also makes the oppressed more compliant with the oppressor's dominance over their lives. African people throughout the diaspora are the unknowing targets of the most elaborately deployed, demoralizing, divide and conquer psychological warfare campaign in history. It's how the white world prevents us from unifying against them. The system is deployed like a massive media marketing campaign that constantly subjects Black people to receiving only the fraudulent worst narratives about ourselves. Within this system, fraudulent Black racially demoralizing propaganda is being pumped unrelentingly into the unsuspecting minds of the Black population without being challenged nor counterbalanced by an equal amount of Black positive racially affirming information. This conveys a subliminal message that Black people are now our own worst enemies and that we therefore need whites to govern over our lives. Moreover, that Black people should admire, respect, and trust only whites. This system is extremely effective because when Black people are repetitively presented on these subliminal narratives from trusted white media sources, it can be very difficult to resist its implied propaganda programming, especially when the propaganda is being told daily and so unrelentingly. Its weapon is the demoralizing message that it carries and the way that it adversely affects the Black population in terms of our behavior. With time being unable to refute the constant negative information told about ourselves, many Black people eventually comes to accept those negative narratives. They internalize them. The constant taunting and negative propaganda unconsciously influence how many Black people feel about ourselves, creating division and self-hatred among us. It also turns the collective frustrations and aggressions of Black people away from the white society and redirected towards ourselves. This is the true reason why many Black people speak negatively of ourselves. Through the skillful, sustained use of repetitive media propaganda campaign, white oppressive forces have created a prison for the minds of millions of Black people. The basis of this concept of warfare works by affecting the subconscious minds of the Black population through demoralizing propaganda. As I said before, it taps into the immense power that shame has upon the human mind to mentally enslave Black people. Those Black people who don't critically think and question the validity of all information they receive from white sources are the ones that becomes mentally enslaved, never noticing their mental chains. This is all possible because people are like computers. So all you just keep giving them certain information, and you can steer an entire generation towards an applied objective. This is the truth of our plighted condition. I speak and I write for those who are tired of believing in things that insult their intelligence. Those who believe that a Bible written by our enemies, brutally forced upon our ancestors, now provides a path to our salvation, are believing in things that insult their intelligence. Those who believe that we're being controlled by a silly slave syndrome myth, which present would be the least effective method used for controlling a generation of people, are believing in things that insult their own intelligence. The truth is, the white society has weaponized their monopoly over information that we receive to shape our minds in ways that serve to protect the interests of the white society. This is our hidden reality. It's time for us to elevate our minds, to see the truth and understand it, and then develop counter strategies to free ourselves from it. Brothers and sisters, one love and peace.